Welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Storch, and I'm excited that you're joining me today for another great episode and conversation to help you up your game and improve your capabilities in the world of talent development. We're going to be talking about workplace culture and something called cultural intelligence. My guest today is Simmer Singh, who is a seasoned HR leader with extensive experience in Fortune 500 companies, where she's led global transformation projects and navigated complex cultural challenges across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. And as a certified global leadership coach, consultant, and speaker, she specializes in helping organizations thrive through diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, cultural intelligence development, and organizational cultural transformation. Drawing from her personal experience as an immigrant who rebuilt her career in a new culture, Simmer brings a unique perspective to leadership development, particularly in supporting diverse leaders and immigrant professionals. She's passionate about helping others navigate unfamiliar environments while maintaining their cultural values. And today we're going to be talking all about culture. We're going to be talking about leadership. We're going to be talking a little bit about DEI, as well as some other things. So, Simmer, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much. I'm excited as well.
You and I connected a while back, I think through LinkedIn, probably had some mutual friends and connections. And I wanted to share this because I think this is a really important recognition of the power of thought leadership and building your personal brand. Something that you know I'm really big on. I'm working on a new book about this. You started getting really active sharing content on LinkedIn over the last several months, and it really got my attention. And I really love a lot of the things that you've been posting. And so I reached out to you and said, "Hey, can we talk? I want to learn more about what you're doing." We've developed a friendship since then, talking more about the work that we're doing, and invited you on this podcast primarily because I was able to see a lot of the work that you're doing because you were showcasing it out there on LinkedIn. And I know there are probably a lot of other practitioners as well as consultants, entrepreneurs who aspire to do more of that. I'm curious, can we just start there? What was the decision like? Because I remember you told me it's something you've been thinking about for a long time before you finally started doing it. So, how did that come together where you finally started sharing regular content on LinkedIn?
No, thank you so much for noticing. And you've always been one of the people who comments on my posts. And as you know, as somebody who posts regularly, that means a lot. So yeah, I was sitting on it for a long time, Andy. I would post and then I would ghost and then I would start all over again, waiting for my content to be perfect. And one day I just decided that I'm gonna give it a go, no matter, how little or how much I have to say. I'm not gonna, count the likes and the comments.
Right.
And I just decided. And I started actually last November. And like you said, there's so much power in just building relationships and meeting like-minded people like you. You and I met even before that, a few times. And I've always found your stuff so interesting. And in some ways, I think you inspire so many of us to do, just share stuff. I sometimes read your post and it's like, it was my birthday or I went hiking and,
Yeah.
and that's amazing to be able to do that. So yeah, here I am. And I think I've met some interesting people along the way, and I think it's been a very exciting wild ride. And I'm not counting the comments and impressions, I promise, but
Right.
I just show up every day.
Yeah, it's important, especially when you're starting off, to just think about, I'm getting these thoughts out there. Some people will see them, some people may not care. That's okay. No one's really judging me. I just need to get these out and start to work through this and build my brand and reputation. You can't count the likes and the comments because you're not going to get many when you first start out. I think I told you that. And like when I started posting content regularly, I would get absolute crickets. But then people would tell me that they see it, right? And I just had a conversation this week with a client from 10 years ago. We were catching up, and he said, I just want to tell you that I really love all your content that you post on social media. It just really resonates with me. And I don't remember him ever liking or commenting any of my posts, but he's obviously reading it. So people see that stuff. And the same goes for comments for people that are, you're thinking, I'm not ready to start creating content. You can still add a lot of value by adding some comments to people's posts, just a little bit of, thoughtful comment here and there about the work that you're doing. And that starts to build relationships, build your network, and build your personal brand in the space that you're working in. And even if you're not trying to grow a business like you and I are, we all have careers, right, that we're working on, and that can help towards building your brand and building your network that will possibly help you with your career later on.
No, absolutely. I always tell my clients, even those who are in transitions or, senior business leaders, we have to evolve with times.
Mhm.
Remember there was a platform called Orkut, then it was before Facebook, where people would
I don't
on
remember life
social
before Facebook.
media.
I don't.
Must be more popular in Asia because, I was in India that time.
Okay.
And then the whole Facebook wave came. And,
Yeah.
now there's Instagram and there's
Right.
for, LinkedIn for professional connections. And I feel like we all have to ride the wave. I was sitting on it. I was like, why do I
Mhm.
have to ride? Why do I have to share?
Right.
But I do feel like if we want to build a brand, if we want to meet like-minded people, if we want to learn from each other, this is
Mhm.
the way to go. And
Yep.
you may not, I'm sure there's so much research that you've read, right? But
Mhm.
there is a likelihood of double or three times the chance that somebody will hire you or buy from you
Mhm.
if you're regular on LinkedIn. There's so
That's right.
much like data proving that. So I feel like we all have to, fortunately or unfortunately, kind of sail along.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're originally from India, and I wanted to touch on that because a lot of the content you post talks about uh, dealing with cultural assimilation or learning about new cultures when you move, especially from someone in Southeast Asia, moving to the United States, where the working culture can be quite different. Can you share a little bit about your experience, especially moving into or working in a new culture and some of the things you learned from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought I knew all about the American culture because I had so many friends, clients, siblings, cousins,
Yeah.
but not really. It was very different. It's very different when you live in a country and you work there and you build a personal and professional network. Very interesting, kind of stuff that I noticed. And I remember initially, when I moved and I was applying for jobs because that's what I did for 2 decades in Asia. And I was like, it's same corporate Asia,
Mhm.
corporate America. And, I wouldn't get any hits. Nobody would call me. And then I slowly started networking and reaching out. And so many people, helped me. And, I started getting interviews. And I remember in one of the interviews, I was pregnant and I was interviewing, and somebody said to me, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater." And I was like, "Oh my God, this sounds horrible for somebody who's expecting. Like, what does that even mean?" Or the sports analogies and
Uh-huh.
just the way we connect. Sometimes people would be talking about like games and meetings, or they would be talking about Hollywood music. I mean, the only like remote Hollywood singer that I knew was Bryan Adams. He's also Canadian. And the only song that I could think of was like, "Please Forgive Me." And I was like, what am I supposed to add in these meetings? But to cut the long story short, I think just the difference in, the collective culture that I came from to a very hyper individualistic environment, where, you're supposed to self-advocate. I grew up in a very academic focused Asian household, which was all about, work hard, keep your head down, think
Mhm.
about the community, don't make a fuss,
Mhm.
don't shame your uncles and aunts by doing something that we won't be proud of.
Right.
And suddenly you're in this environment where, you're supposed to kind of self-advocate. I saw people getting promoted. I remember having a conversation with the manager where I asked her, why wasn't I put on a certain project, which was very high profile? And she was like, "I didn't know you wanted it." You know, I was like, okay. And
Interesting.
so many other things. So I think it is definitely interesting, but also many good things,
Mm.
like learning to have boundaries or,
Yeah.
respect for each other's time and sometimes putting yourself over others. So
Mm.
a lot of learnings along the way.
Uh, uh, Going back to, like I said earlier, I'm big on this idea of building a personal brand and people knowing about the work that you do or the work that you're interested in doing. I think it's become more and more important in the future. So I
Sure.
can't help but ask about that moment where you have a boss pass you over for a project, and then when you ask why you weren't considered, say, "Well, I didn't know that you wanted to do this work." What was that moment like? What did you learn from that moment? Obviously, something about self advocacy is got to be more important in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, the biggest learning was that it's a little bit of always expecting your bosses to like show your work or push you
Mm.
forward and things like that. But the reality is that everybody busy in their own world. They have their own goals, own aspirations. So nobody's going to pull you from under the desk and say, hey, Simmer, here's your promotion or
Right.
here's, what you deserve. In fact, it's also happened to me, in some part of my corporate career where I'm like helping out other people and I'm like, sure, I got your deck and I'll make these slides for you and look at this. And, people have taken that work and shown it, in forums and not given any credit to me. And
Oh.
I'm like, okay, maybe, and I saw that. I remember once, one of my colleagues, she was very upset and she walked into the room after a meeting and I said, what happened? And she said, my boss presented two slides that were created by me and she didn't even say my name.
Mhm.
And I thought, like, I've created slides for my bosses all my
Like this
life.
is my weekly situation. Yeah.
Yeah, but the to bring out the critical part here, Andy, is that a lot of times in our culture or the culture where you grow up, it could be different. Like for me, it was like if my boss looks good, I look good. I don't have to shine.
Mhm.
I don't have to get
Mhm.
the credit. It's
Yeah.
teamwork. If the team
Yeah.
has done good work, like of course I'm the leader, so the credit
Mhm.
goes to me. And a lot of people would say me, Simmer, you give so much credit to other people. Even if Andy and I are talking and Andy gave me an idea, I'm like, Andy, you sparked this idea for me. And I was like, isn't that like normally what everybody does? Or isn't that
Mhm.
the usual norm? But it's
Mhm.
different. So that's how you adapt. And, I started talking about my work. I would make sure I get the credit. In the beginning of a project, I would ask, like, what's the expectation? And, how will I get the credit for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of people would ask or think about the idea that there's a balance, right? You don't want to go around bragging about everything you did all the time because no one likes that. But the point is that you've come from a culture where it's expected that you be humble and quiet and just do what is best for the team. And hopefully you'll be rewarded for that. Whereas in our typical US Western culture, people are expected to speak up more and talk about the work that they're doing and advocate for themselves. So it's a very interesting shift. And I know you help other people with understanding those differences now and navigating their careers in the US. I want to shift and talk about culture more broadly and workplace culture because something that everybody has been through, regardless of what country they come from or what culture they live in, was the global pandemic back in 2020, which completely changed the way we did work, right? I mean, before that, I was traveling all around running workshops in person. And then since then, they've mostly been done in virtual. A lot of companies went to fully remote or hybrid. Many companies are now coming back to requiring everyone to be in the office a certain number of days a week, whereas other companies have gone fully remote. And, it's kind of spread out all over the place. I'm curious in your work, I know you've looked a lot into this. What have you found makes a good workplace culture these days?
No, thank you so much. And that's such an interesting topic, right? I think pretty much what you're saying is how are we looking beyond the models, right?
Hmm.
RTO versus hybrid versus remote. And I think I'm kind of working a lot on this and I've researched a little bit. I feel like there are three or four critical parts and big shifts that I'm seeing, right? One is a clear shift in, how we manage performance and how we manage commitment of our employees. You know, Goal setting is more agile, accountability, there's continuous feedback. And a little bit of it actually had even started pre-pandemic where people were doing away with the ratings and it was more about, quick check-ins and agile feedback and things like that. I think that's pretty important, especially for the younger generation. Nobody's going to sit there, wait for the year-long, process to take place to get feedback. People want quick training, quick feedback. And I think the second shift there in the whole, performance management world is more like skill-based kind of development, right? Less about experience, less about qualification, but more about what you bring to the table. So that's one. I think in leadership, I'm seeing a huge shift in the whole self-awareness, empathy. All of us, after weathering the same storm, are kind of craving that interconnectedness where we can depend on each other. There's high trust. And I'm almost seeing a little bit of, where I grew up, like the Eastern philosophy kind of amalgamating with the Western philosophy of, building that self-awareness. Like, how are you landing on people? Are you stepping into their shoes? Are you creating an environment where people feel safe enough to share their point of view and they're
Mm.
collaborating? So I feel like there's a huge, huge in the coaching world, I'm sure you're seeing so many, coaching has become so popular, meditation, yoga, all
Mm-hmm.
of that is connected to building that, inner peace and more awareness about our blind spots, our strengths, and things like that. So that's the second piece. I think the third is really connected teams, which is where we would bring in teams are global. We're living in a global world, and I feel like having the empathy and intelligence to understand each other's cultures, to understand how we are showing up, that trust, psychological safety is very important in teams.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth is the whole mental health, well-being, which I think we appreciate a lot more now, with the way we operate. Employees, want to make sure that they have work-life balance, they build meaningful connections at work, there's emotional,
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity around what they bring to the table. So I think these are the critical shifts, at least that I'm noticing. And I feel like there's so much that we can do, right? Every
Yeah.
organization can start from at least picking up one out of the four.
Right. And every organization's going in their own direction, right? And depends on the leadership and the culture and the history and the location and all of those things. So there's a lot of differences out there, but you've been working on a white paper around this. You sent me an early draft, which I had a chance to go through. And in your white paper, you discuss how cultural intelligence quotient differs from emotional intelligence. I wonder if you could elaborate on those differences and explain more about this idea of cultural intelligence and how people can think about this for their own organization.
Yeah, I feel like the key difference in emotional intelligence and, is emotional intelligence is just your ability to understand other people's,
Mm,
emotions, and that you could do very well with people from your own community,
mm,
to read body language, to make sure that you understand what's going on, when people are saying a certain things, active listening and things like that. But I think CQ, which is, which we're talking about, cultural intelligence, is the ability to work effectively across cultures and contexts. And it's a very, very crucial skill today. And there are four critical aspects of it. The first one is the CQ motivation, which is your willingness to learn about other cultures. Then there is the knowledge, which is more about understanding how cultural norms work, values, behaviors of people, which you and I are talking about
mhm,
collective versus
mhm,
individualistic and things like that. And then there is the whole, CQ strategy, which is, more around planning, awareness. Most of us walk into cultural, interactions without any preparation, and sometimes, things happen in a way that are not so conducive. And then the other is the CQ behavior or action, the kind of a non-verbal way of adapting to cultural, intelligence in different aspects. So I think that's really what cultural intelligence is. People with high EQ actually are able to adapt more to the cultural sensitivities, but it's
mm,
not the other way around. So I
mm.
feel like it's very, very critical in today's global world and how we're operating.
Okay. You mentioned this briefly, and you also mentioned in the white paper the concept of cultural blind spots. I wonder if you can explain a little bit more about that and maybe share an example, if you have any, of how these blind spots have maybe caused challenges in leadership or for an organization.
I
No?
think we have to, yeah, I don't
Okay. All
remember.
right. Let me try that again. You mentioned briefly the concept of blind spots. I think in the white paper you also mentioned the concept of cultural blind spots. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about what that looks like or what that is, and how we can identify those to figure out where we might have blind spots in our organization.
I think a lot of times, we human beings are biased, and I
Mm,
feel like we all grow up, with certain beliefs, assumptions, values, and we don't realize that the way we see and look at things is not how different cultures, look at things. And one of the things that I've noticed, growing up in India is about like what we were talking about. Can we scrap this? Like,
of
I don't
course.
know about like where did I write about cultural blind spots and
Oh,
where
that's not in the I don't know, in the white paper.
is this in the white
I don't know. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I just asked AI to read it and give me some questions.
paper?
Um, it's AI. It's
Maybe
the
we can move back to a little bit about, your questions and move out of the cultural intelligence piece and maybe
okay.
talk more about. leadership and team effectiveness or
Okay.
things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I'll
Let's
also
get
go to
it.
your questions if you want to talk about those.
Okay. So we talked a little about cultural intelligence and workplace culture and where things are going. I think that a lot of times we talk about these topics broadly and culture as if it's a thing that just exists on its own, which in some respects it does. But at the same time, it's largely driven by leaders in an organization, right, from the top all the way down throughout to the frontline leaders. And I think you've written about the importance of authentic leadership across cultures. Can you talk about the role of leadership in driving workplace culture and what you've seen be successful and maybe not so successful in organizations?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this, right? I think a big wave of like the whole human-centric concept of leadership, right? How are leaders creating culture which is conducive to the organization's, environment, what's okay and what's not okay. I think a few key concepts that I'm a big fan of, and I really, kind of talk about it in my training programs and when I'm consulting is, vulnerability. How do you show your courage from embracing uncertainty, or risks or taking risks and being okay with the emotional exposure?
Mm,
How are leaders, owning up to their mistakes and saying, I'm sorry, I goofed up? And that's how you create a safe space for other people to talk about. The other concept, is this whole I think, and I think you've talked about it, Andy, a little bit about the myth of scarcity, where,
mm,
leaders feel like there's not enough for everyone.
right.
I've led teams, once I led a team which was, had gone through multiple changes in leadership and things like that. And, I was given the task of kind of fixing that team and making sure that people are inspired and then, they're driving towards the goals of the organization. And at the big piece of that was missing in that team, everybody thought that there was not enough in the pie for them.
Mm,
And the roles were not set up in a way where the leaders were truly what I call bringing in the native genius of each one of the employees. I
hmm
mean, I do believe in the concept of that you're supposed to self-advocate, but I do feel like as leaders, it's our job to make sure that we figure out what the native genius is or what is that strength of each one of our team members and create that space for them to to shine. So these are a few key things I feel like I'm noticing and I'm a big fan of. And I feel like as things are progressing or as we are making more progress with this whole, well-being, resilient environments post-pandemic, it'll play a key role.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, I'm curious, what are some strategies or tactics or things that you see leaders do that are helping them connect with people on their team and really motivating them more? I know you touched on the idea of really being more human and vulnerable and even admitting to mistakes, which a lot of leaders think that, that they shouldn't do, right? Their ego prevents them. And you also talked about the idea of native genius. So understanding people's strengths and how you can leverage those more. How do you think about a really effective approach to leadership in today's modern world where things have changed a lot from the old ways of command and control, and people do want a more human approach or connection from their leaders?
I think there are a couple of elements to that, right? One critical element is, to create an environment where there are open channels of communication, people feel like they can ask you questions and things like that. I feel like building trust is another critical aspect, and trust comes from getting to know your team members a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that was a little bit of a shift that, I realized when I moved from India as well, where, you're invited to your boss's kids' birthday parties
Mm-hmm.
and, you celebrate festivals together or you meet up for evening coffees. I feel like just getting to know your people, getting to know what their aspirations are. There are always things that people are good at, but there are always elements of your job that are not so fun. So, a leader's job is to make sure that they're making those elements
Mm-hmm.
interesting, they're making sure that the long-term goals or long-term career aspirations of their employees are taken care of. I think the other critical thing I always say, for leaders is what are your people saying about you when you're not in the room? What is that personal brand, for an Andy or a Simmer? And do your people experience you in the same way? If Andy is somebody who is a very authentic, guy who gives amazing feedback, always, invests in people, that is some values that people see in you. And how are you building that brand for yourself? How are you making sure that people are experiencing that in a way that, they say those things about you even when you're not there? So I think that's another critical piece, that I feel like leaders need to invest in creating their own brand and making sure that developing their teams as well.
Oh, absolutely. And related to this human connection, you have had the experience of moving and working in a different country, different culture. I know you work with particularly women and professionals who have moved and work in a different culture, and you see how organizations are integrating them or not doing a great job of integrating them. Just curious, what are the most common mistakes you see organizations making when implementing cross-cultural training programs or bringing on people from other countries, and are they supporting them well or not?
So many. Do you know what is the cost of bringing in a leader from a different culture and that leader failing? Like, make a
No.
wild guess.
Well, I would imagine that at some point they may not stick it out or may not last, right? And so you at least got the replacement cost of their recruiting and their salary or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost upwards of $1 million when
Whoa.
you have an expat leader and the leader doesn't succeed and you have to replace that leader with somebody else. I feel like I've seen that so many times, right? We, bring in somebody from a different culture, they're leading a team in a different culture, without any training, without kind of helping them, even for me, I think the whole settling in a different country, getting used to the culture, I had to create my own network, Andy. I didn't know anyone, in this country when I moved here. A lot of times when I was even applying for jobs or when I embarked upon my entrepreneurial journey, people were like, go and talk to your network, and I was like, well, my network is not here. So I think a critical thing is, especially if you're moving leaders across cultures, giving them that cultural sensitivity training, making sure you're helping them settle in a different culture, providing the support to them, their family in the first 3 to 6 months. Coca-Cola does a really good job. They do when they move leaders, and simply because they have a global market, they've done a really good job of assessing their leaders on the cultural front, making sure they give them the training, making sure they have all the resources, and they've launched many campaigns around that. So I think those are a few critical things I would think. And just generally, I feel like one of the things for you to understand when you're in a different culture is what are the things that you're going to kind of let go a little bit. Like for me, this strong sense of community was I what I was also always missing. But also I was enjoying my freedom, I was enjoying building new relationships here, I was enjoying building a home away from home. And I quickly learned how you kind of build that community. I reached out to people like just reached out to people on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm interested in learning more about the role. I'm applying for this role and I see that you're already doing this role. Would you be happy to chat? And I
Mm,
was surprised how much, I found those mentors along the way, but I had to do all that work myself.
yeah. So
So I
taking a
feel
very
like
proactive approach to it.
yeah, and a lot of times people don't know. Like I didn't know that, and those were times were also very different. I don't think LinkedIn was that popular. Like now you can actually like just reach out, right? Like, but I think those times were different. I didn't know that this is okay to do. Like in my country, there's a whole hierarchy. Like you don't just
Mm,
randomly reach out to people.
yeah.
So I feel like the necessary skills, the necessary mindset, good relationships, giving them some foundation, some communities where they can go and learn from, maybe having mentors for these leaders, somebody who's made the move before them and can mentor them and, provide them with some feedback and things like that is very, very helpful.
What about from a talent development perspective? Obviously, this is a podcast about talent development. Most of our listeners work in learning and development, talent development, and are putting together some types of leadership development or other types of talent development programs, whether they are regional in person or a lot of times virtual and global and inviting people from lots of different countries and cultures. I work with many global companies. And when I run my Own Your Career program, for example, virtually, we often have people joining from across the US and Canada, as well as Europe and Israel, and many times people joining from India. And while a lot of times we may think, well, these concepts should be relevant to everybody no matter where they are there things that we can be thinking about to take into consideration that we have people joining from different countries or different cultures, or when we're designing training that goes across different cultures?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think finding the right audience and doing a little bit of research and interviewing people. I have had, once a very crazy experience where I was training this team in India, and I got on, this Zoom session, and I'm talking about imposter syndrome to these
Mm,
women. I think you talked about women leadership, and I was helping women who were kind of in their early career and trying to make it big and move on to the next level. And I started talking about imposter syndrome, and everybody was looking at me like, they didn't understand what I was saying. And
mm,
you and I both know this is such a popular term in the US, and they
right.
didn't understand it at
They didn't
all.
know it. Mm,
And then I had to kind of, ask them like, what I mean is this, and explain to them in a language which was much simpler,
mm,
right? Like the whole limiting beliefs, and feel like you don't belong, and feel like you're gonna fail, and always being, and they did get the concept. So I do feel like when we are designing program, kind of understanding what are the learner to learner differences, right?
mm,
And interviewing the audience in advance. I think the second thing that's really helpful is, what are we trying to achieve as the end objective? Is it just learning about each other's culture? Is it more about, we're changing on the job behavior, and kind of going from that, and how are you going to measure the success in the end? I think are some critical pieces.
okay. Yeah, absolutely. And really just thinking about who's going to be there, what do they understand, what do they maybe need more help understanding, and starting from that basis. I always got that reminder or thought about that as I used to travel around the world running business acumen and strategy workshops, and we would remind ourselves all the time to like, hey, take it easy on the references to American sports that we're so used to making all the time, because people in Europe, or if you're in Asia, like they may not follow American football or baseball and know what you're talking about when you say, "Oh, you really hit a home run with that one," and they're like, "I don't know what that is." So it's always a good idea to take a step back and check in with the kind of colloquial language that you're using when you're running programs, and is that relevant or understandable to people in different cultures. The last thing I want to ask you about is your white paper touches on the intersection of DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and cultural intelligence. And DEI is in a kind of a interesting place right now in our global culture and zeitgeist, as many companies seem to be pulling back in the United States, but many other companies are still investing heavily or believe strongly in DEI. And I'm just curious, based on your experience, how have you seen that play out? How do these two areas complement each other when you think about building a strong culture or a strong workplace culture?
I think they work very well with each other, right? I think diversity, equity, inclusion is more about, understanding our biases, right? How do we contribute to microaggressions and intersectionality? I'm a woman of color, but I'm also in the corporate sector. I can speak in a certain language. All these are different facets and different parts of our cultural identity. And I think a lot of times, just understanding that human beings are biased, and we are
Mm,
very, biased towards what we know or how we've grown up or the values that we've been raised with, our assumptions, the books we've read, the predisposed values that were given to us, and just starting from curiosity, right?
mm,
Like we were talking about in the whole cultural intelligence, are we trying to understand about, that how do different people operate? Why are their values different? How do they think? I think sometimes we have a very linear way of thinking. And when we see people who totally approach things differently, a kind of a threat response gets evoked in our heads. And there's a lot of research around that. I'm sure you've also heard about that. So just, having the curiosity and eagerness to learn about different perspectives, to learn about, people's ability to connect with other people, how they show up at work, simple things like, growing up in the Asian culture, you don't talk when your bosses are talking. Or, a lot of times when I'm coaching people who've grown up here, they're like, Simar, I have this challenge that, the Indian team is saying yes to everything, but they're not delivering, and I don't know where the gap is. And they should be thinking about these 10 things that I
Hmm.
need in this report. And I'm like, have you told them? Have you
Mm.
communicated with them that you need these 10 things? And if they say yes, have you asked them, have you double checked their understanding or made clear on what their deliverables are
Mm.
and things like that? So I think just generally reflecting upon your biases, but also kind of understanding different cultures and reading about those things in advance. If you're dealing with Asian culture or people in Europe,
Yep.
even humor. I mean, humor is different.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're now in Barcelona and you've been in the US. The slapstick kind of Europe British humor is
Yeah.
very different than
Yeah.
how people make fun in the US. And sometimes, it can be very awkward when you don't understand,
Right.
what the other person was saying was funny vis-a-vis. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It used to happen to me all the time. I had a big question mark on my face.
Right.
So I feel like starting from your own awareness and biases, moving on to curiosity and making that effort and a little bit of preparation would go a long way. And they just, work
Yeah.
very well together.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess lucky and unlucky for me, I'm still spending most of my day on Zoom with fellow Americans and Brits. But yeah, humor is always different for everybody. And I've talked to friends here and my wife about the fact that we're learning Spanish, and I have a goal of becoming more fluent in Spanish, but I may never understand jokes from natives, right, as they're joking around, because it always requires such like innate knowledge of like colloquial, language and what people have grown up speaking and how language has evolved. And, you may not necessarily get that. So it's always interesting to take those things into account. Simmer, just a couple more, quick round questions, if you will. What is a trend that you're following or excited about in talent development right now?
A trend. I think I've been reading a lot about different models of designing like programs.
Hmm.
One thing that I'm a big fan of, I'm moving away from, training as the solution to
Hmm.
everything, but more what are the goals that we are trying to kind of achieve, with
Hmm.
in partnership with business, and I think I'm noticing a lot of taking into account, how our learners learn. What are different things that we need to take into account when we're designing our initiatives? For example, you and I talked about, if you're trying to target an Asian market, do you have enough leaders who can go over and understand the trends of the Asian market and are prepared with that cultural intelligence to take over that Asian market?
Hmm.
If you're designing an initiative, are you looking at on-the-job behavior? There's definitely a couple of big shifts that I'm seeing. One is, from curriculum design to more learning experience. The other is owning the content to more connecting the learners to resources. There's so much content. Nobody has the time to sit through a one-day workshop. So are you creating those learning assets and learning moments for your people throughout their entire journey where they can develop? The second big trend I think all of us have been talking about is AI,
Hmm.
right? There are chatbots, there are mentors, there are coaches, there's virtual reality. Are we bringing in using those technologies to maybe creating individual learning experiences? It's almost like Netflix recommends the shows, right? Now AI is recommending where are the skill gaps, who needs to take what training and things like that. And I think then what are we measuring in the end? I feel in the talent development world, I've realized a lot of times we do trainings, we do initiatives, but if we don't begin with, what is the one thing that we want to kind of impact? Is it productivity? Is it, shortening the learning curve? Is it
Hmm.
attrition? Is it engagement? Being very clear about that. And people are asking those questions, right? Like sometimes a training could be just knowledge transfer. We
Hmm.
don't expect anything else. Sometimes it could be on the job, change of behavior. Sometimes it could be leading teams or, going and being successful in a different country. So I think those are the things that I'm following, and I'm a big proponent of. Things have changed so much from just training to, kind of the business results and partnering with business in a way that's beyond training.
Yeah, absolutely. Summer, has there been a book or a TED Talk that has made a big difference for you or that you often recommend, or maybe just one you've read recently that's been interesting?
So I'm a big proponent of Brene Brown's work. I feel
Mm,
like daring greatly, the whole wholehearted living. And I talked about a few concepts of resilience, vulnerability, shame. I feel like if as a leader you've not read that book, definitely a big, big recommendation. The other book that I'm currently following because I'm in need of a ruthless prioritized life as a mom is 12 Weeks, by Brian P. and Michael Lennington.
mm,
Um, it just talks about the concept of how your whole year is equivalent to 12 weeks. So basically, you trick your mind into creating goals for 12 weeks and you consider those 12 weeks
mm.
as a year. And he gives a lot of examples where, the sales happen really maximum in December, not because, there's a magical whatever thing about December, but it's
Yeah,
also because, we feel like, this is the deadline. This is the real
yeah,
deadline. So I think
right.
that's one book that I'm currently reading, and I'm creating a lot of, my own timetable and my schedule and using
Mm.
their tools, which have been very helpful.
And I think the book is called The 12-Week Year, right? As
The
a
12-week year,
12-week
yes.
year, right? About the
Yes.
quarterly goals and taking those annual goals and shrink them down to quarterly. Simmer, is there a platform or a tool or an app you use that you find helps you get your work done easier that you can't live without?
Um, I feel like I'm using a lot of my, I don't have,
Got nothing. It's not Apollo, huh?
it's not Apollo. I wish I
It's
could talk
not
about that.
Apollo. We can skip that one. Um, Simmer, last question for you. For those out there in talent development who are looking for ways to grow in their careers, what's one more piece of advice you would give?
Just work closely with business. I feel
Mm.
like understand what their goals are, understand, what their next 2 to 3 year challenges are, and work backwards towards how you can support them, whether it's in creating leadership pipeline, whether it's, in rehauling their performance management system or getting more productivity, whether it's SaaS transformation, what's the business worried about, and how can you then design a solution that helps them, fight that challenge or achieve that goal.
I agree completely. Simmer, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. And I know as of we're Simmer, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you making time to come on and share. And I know that we mentioned a white paper you're working on. I know as of now, it's not available, but I know you'll publishing it at some point. Now we can scrap that. Do you want to talk about where it's going to be available, or we could just say, tell you what, we'll just start that over. Sarah, this has been really great talking with you. I think there's so much more we could go into, especially on this idea of cultural intelligence and companies building effective workplace cultures and integrating people from different cultures. So I look forward to keeping in touch with you on this. For those listening who want to get in touch with you, maybe ask more questions, have a discussion on this, work with you, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, from my LinkedIn, of course, and then I have a website which is called Glint with a double T, glintconsulting.com. So those are the two places. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. So yeah, anytime Simmer and Singh is my profile. So reach out anytime to have a conversation or chat about what's happening in your life.
All right. Reach out to Summer. Let her know you heard her on the Talent Development Hot Seat podcast with me. And if you haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, Andy Storch, make sure you come connect with me and let me know that you listen to the show as well. I love connecting to listeners and people in talent development, hearing your feedback, getting your ideas, and hearing about what you're up to as well. Summer, thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to talking with you more soon.
Thank you so much, Andy. And I love all the amazing work that you're doing, and I can't wait to hear this episode.